All right, let's bring on another friend of the podcast. Chris Trapasso, CBS Sports, joins me here on Chargers Weekly. Chris, this would be a much different week, man. We'd be doing this in person in Indianapolis, maybe little Kilroy's, St. Elmo's. It's all changed, man. How you doing?
I know. First off, I'm doing good, but it is a bummer that we're not in Indianapolis. For all the hustle and bustle and everyone that converges on Indianapolis for the combine, and then just to see how the players work out and plug them into any models that you have and see how players compare to prospects in the past. That's what's so fun about Combine Week. They're long days, very long nights too, but it's usually a really fun week in Indy. We just have to kind of look at the pro days this year for all those workouts for the prospects.
You're right. It's like 3 days that kind of just all run together. It's like one long 72-hour day for folks in the media. Hey, what are our teams missing out on this week that it's really going to affect the draft process? Obviously, all 32 teams in the same boat, but scouting departments, front offices, they're going to have to adapt to this. And I can't imagine there's one central formula for all 32 teams. I mean, I know film is going to be of the utmost priority, but there's a lot of things that could potentially slip through the cracks that you have to be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk to anyone that is employed by an NFL team, they'll tell you that the medical checks are such a big part of the combine. And there are some marquee prospects. I think Jaylen Waddle, chief among them, the wide receiver from Alabama, that have some medical issues, and teams like to see where a player is in his recovery process if he is injured. So to not have that, and then moving forward into those pro days, we're going to see some times in the 4.1s in the 40-yard dash. We're going to see some crazy 3-cone times. Teams kind of have to adjust, like how much better are these teams boosting up their players in those pro days and comparing those again to the past to see really truly how athletic a certain prospect is. Those will be the two biggest obstacles that we just have not had to deal with as draft analysts, as members of the media, and then even NFL teams have not really had something like this. It's a really unprecedented situation.
You had a good piece a couple of days ago about, I think, four key things that are going to affect the draft evaluation process now that we don't have a combine. And one of the things is just the pro days, the emphasis on the pro day. I think you said it used to be the little brother of the combine. Now it's going to be center stage. It's almost as if, Chris, that the combine is going to last over the next couple of months because the importance of each of these pro days we're going to see on NFL Network and ESPN and online, all eyes on these prospects at their schools as opposed to Indianapolis.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point, that it really will be one long combine, which I guess that's maybe a positive spin on this, is that I'm usually bummed, maybe just because I'm a draft nerd, but I'm bummed at the end of the combine. And this year we're going to be, at individual schools seeing these marquee prospects, and it will be a month-and-a-half long process to get all these numbers, 40-yard dash, 3-cone vertical to show the explosiveness. And I think we're going to see more players actually working out because the environment at a pro day, they're familiar with, the wide receivers they're throwing to, their coaches, everything's going to be scripted. They're not having to get up at 5 a.m. to do a medical check or an interview. So it was a little bit of a disappointment last year that a lot of the marquee names decided not to work out at the combine because even though it's a standardized environment for everyone, and I think that's what teams and analysts like, it's not the most conducive to peak athletic performance for a lot of these players, especially if they're working out in the morning or, with it being switched to primetime last year, they're up all day, they're having to run a 40-yard dash at night. We're going to get to see some of these receivers and tight ends and corners run really fast in a familiar environment. So I'm all for that.
So I look at the pros and cons to kind of the current state that we're in. I think the riskiness of it is that there's certain guys who haven't played football in a long time, and you're relying on film from 2019, let's say, and just maybe a small sample size of film in 2020. That leads to potential error maybe in the first couple of rounds. Maybe you overvalue a guy who probably isn't a first or a second round pick. On the other side of the coin, there's probably guys in mid to late rounds who could have boosted their stock to the first or second round. And I think you specifically mentioned some of these smaller school prospects that aren't going to get the fair shake that they would typically get. That could lead to some really interesting middle rounds. And I've said this the last few weeks, the Chargers have 9 picks. So the likelihood that you may hit on a guy in the 4th or 5th or 6th round is a little bit higher this year. And then you take it out of the draft. Austin Eckler, man, the Western State, there could be a lot of guys that do not get drafted that probably should have been drafted this year, Chris.
Yeah, I think what is good about it, though, is the fact that we had the Senior Bowl, and the Senior Bowl does a great job highlighting those small school players from the FCS level, D1, D2, and even D3, to have a guard from Wisconsin Whitewater, Quinn Manhurst, there this year, and had a fantastic week. Yeah, he was the best blocker at the Senior Bowl. It's good that we still had that. If there was no Senior Bowl, it would be really hard to uncover these guys. But Senior Bowl, there's 70 to 100 players. The Combine invites 300, and we normally see more players pop up, at the Combine that are small school guys or from a different level that put their name on the draft radar. But again, with these pro days, we're gonna be more reliant on those and pay more attention to them. So maybe there will be a Western Kentucky or just a running back or a wide receiver from a smaller school that will have a really impressive pro day that could get him on the map. But I do think for the small school guys, they're hurt by this because the Combine is such a good event to get them into the spotlight.
Especially if you didn't play last year, right? I mean, that's the one thing too, is like you could look at somebody's pro day and say, wow, he ran a fast 40 and his vertical was off the charts and was catching the ball, but man, he hadn't played in 2 years. So, how do you square that? I think that's going to be kind of a challenging thing. And I don't know if there's a one size fits all answer to that.
Well, yeah, I think with the opt-out players, it's really interesting because so many of them looked like players that still needed another year of seasoning at the collegiate level. And you watch your film, you see some weaknesses. Maybe they're not the fastest yet. They're not as good recognizing coverage if they're a quarterback or they're playing safety or corner. And to not get that final season to kind of fine-tune their game, and certainly not blaming any of these players for opting out when they did. Sure. But I think that is going to make so many of these big boards look completely different around the league. I think in general, certainly teams miss on early picks every year, but in general, the NFL does a good job recognizing which players can play in their league. But this year, and really by April, most of the big boards look pretty similar around the league. This year, I think it's going to look completely different because of what you said. Some teams are going to like the fact that a player is fresh, didn't get injured, opted out, was able to work out for a season. And some teams are not going to like that for a lot of the reasons that I just pointed out. They would have liked to see some weaknesses get ironed out over the course of the fall and into the winter that weren't able to do that. So we're going to see a wider disparity in how teams view even some of these early picks, first and second rounders, than we've ever seen before.
So, Chris, you mentioned Jaylen Waddle at the top. I looked at your latest mock that dropped on Wednesday. You have Jaylen Waddle to the LA Chargers at number 13 overall. In a draft where a lot of people are leaning towards offensive line in the media, saying that that's the position of need, and it is. It's a position of need. But make the case for Jaylen Waddle to the Chargers. When you look at Justin Herbert, what he did this year, the weapons he already has, and to add another explosive piece like Waddle to the mix.
Jaylen Waddle would be the absolute home run pick for the Chargers at 13 overall. Watching his film, Jamar Chase's film, and Devontae Smith, like the top 3 wide receivers in this class. If you watch their film back to back, it's easy to see they're all great after the catch, very dynamic athletes. They're all fantastic in those contested catch situations. But Jaylen Waddle is the fastest of the bunch down the field, and he just moves different. I think he's a better separator in the NFL, running routes, and just really what he can do after the catch. He's a little bit more sudden than Jamar Chase, and changing directions a little bit better than Devontae Smith. I think that if you look at the NFL today and you look at certainly having the quarterback in Justin Herbert is the most important, but teams are not just getting 2 wide receivers. They want 3 quality wide receivers, maybe even a good pass catching tight end and a good running back who can catch passes out of the backfield. That's the new NFL. Look at what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did. They loaded up on weapons. Look what the Buffalo Bills did for Josh Allen to bring in John Brown and Cole Beasley and then trade for Stephon Diggs. So I think if you're the Chargers, offensive line and really the offensive tackle class is a good one. So that will help the Chargers. Jaylen Waddle is just not a type of a prospect that you can replicate in round 2 or round 3, that he is a complete skill set. If his ankle is 100%, and you would expect by the season it will be, he's there at 13. You worry about offensive line in round 2, maybe even earlier in free agency, and you pick Jaylen Waddle, plug him in with Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, some of those other downfield threats to really accentuate the arm strength and all the talent that Justin Herbert has.
Yeah, so let's go deeper into what that would look like. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, big body who can hit his 50-50 ball is an 80-20 ball around here.
Yeah, definitely.
And Jaylen Waddle. Then Tyron Johnson and Jalen Guyton, undrafted guys who are speedsters that Justin Herbert found early chemistry with. That would be 5 wide receivers. You go 1 to 5.
That's what you want.
One of the best in the league. Obviously, Hunter Henry situation still up in the air. Austin Eckler out of the backfield catching balls. The offense in a league where you have to keep up with teams like the Chiefs, especially in that division, that's very intriguing. So let's just say for the sake of this conversation, you do get a skill position player. And the fact that, Chris, he's your number 1 receiver, right? Over Chase,
yep.
over Devontae Smith.
Yeah, just because he moves different, like I said, I think they're all 3 going to be really good wide receivers. But if you watch the All-22 film, you see Jaylen Waddle running routes, the quickness that he changes direction, and then by like the second step, he's at full speed already once he changes direction. And then that, I think, legitimate low 4.3 speed, and the fact that even at 5'10", he plays like he's 6'3" because of his leaping ability and how well he tracks it. I think if you're just scouting on traits, not production, not awards or accolades, Jaylen Waddle is the most talented wide receiver in this draft class. And really, like you mentioned, the Chiefs, he reminds me a lot of Tyreek Hill. You can use him down the field. You can give him jet sweeps. You can hand him the football. You can use him in the backfield. That it doesn't matter what type of defense or cornerback you're facing. He's a movable chess piece that truly can score anywhere on the field.
So I love this conversation. It's a different hypothetical convo each week leading up to the draft. So let's look at the second round, because at some point you're going to have to address the offensive line. The gap between Slater, Sewell, Darisaw, Vera Tucker at the top of the first round, maybe those first 15, 20 picks, and a player you would get at the top of the second or middle of the second. What's the gap there, Chris?
It's not that big. I think those 3 or 4 that you mentioned are legitimate first rounders and are going to be really good in the NFL. But there is Alex Leatherwood from Alabama, who played right guard, and then the last 2 years just completely locked down the left side of that Alabama offensive line. There's Tevin Jenkins, who's the right tackle from Oklahoma State. Very powerful, but I love how fundamentally sound he is. He's very balanced. He's a very good pass protector. He's not just someone that's going to be good for your run game. There's other players, especially at the offensive tackle position, that I think some teams might have Alex Leatherwood or Tevin Jenkins. Even Jackson Carman, the really gigantic offensive tackle from Clemson, who did a great job protecting Trevor Lawrence. They might have some of those prospects in the first round on their big boards. If you can get them in the second round, I think they are plug and play type of guys. After quarterback and probably after receiver, offensive tackle is the best group in this class. Not just top heaviness with some of those names that you mentioned, but the depth into the second and third round, that you can get a starter who can be good right away.
Free agency too will dictate a lot of what the Chargers do. And right now with the cap the way it is, that list of free agents is definitely not complete. There could be some names that get added to that list over the next few weeks. Chris, I want to get you out of here on this because we haven't spoken since Brandon Staley was hired, and just want to get your overall thoughts on the direction of the franchise now with Justin Herbert, Offensive Rookie of the Year. You saw what Kenneth Murray was able to do in year one, and now you bring in Brandon Staley, who really worked wonders with that Rams defense. I know he had Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey, but he had that whole unit humming. Your thoughts on the Chargers getting Derwin James back and what they could potentially do in the AFC West and AFC in general next year?
Yeah, they're a legit team that will be on the upswing. That they're an upstart club. They lost a lot of close games. I know that's kind of been a stigma around this team for a while, but they already had one of the more efficient offenses in the league in Justin Herbert's rookie season. They're going to add weapons, whether it be in free agency or it's at number 13 overall or later in the draft. Jaylen Waddle, maybe even Kyle Pitts, if he's there to fill that Hunter Henry spot. And the Brandon Staley hire, I really like it because I think at times it's easy to say, hey, you have a young quarterback, get an offensive mind. It's all about the quarterback. You know Justin Herbert is going to produce. Fix the defense and bring in someone in Brandon Staley. He's going to run a lot of zone. He's going to make sure that they are not giving up explosive plays. And I think if you're playing an opponent that is going to go down the field 5 or 6 times and have a 10, 11, 12 play drive and score a touchdown, hats off to them. But in general, teams want to hit those explosive plays. And you look over the course of the season, the best offenses and the teams that are scoring the most points, close to 30 points a game, if not higher. So it plays in the Rams in terms of keeping things in front of them, running too high safeties, letting their linebackers make a lot of plays at the second level. That's kind of the book on the Brandon Staley defense. I think he's going to help the defensive line as well. And we know that edge rusher is a kind of a sneaky need as well, opposite Joey Bosa, given the Melvin Ingram situation. So I really think that what Brandon Staley does on defense, the Rams, even with some of the star players, Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald, he did a great job, scheming up some of the other secondary players that weren't necessarily household names and getting the most out of them. So to bring in someone to kind of help the defense with a new age scheme in Brandon Staley to limit explosive plays, I think is a really smart decision. Right the ship on that side and let Justin Herbert and the skill position players lead you to, 10, 11, 12 wins in 2021.
Chris Trapasso, CBS Sports. Always appreciate the conversation, man. Tell me what you have going on over the next couple of months and where people can find you.
Just at cbssports.com/NFL/draft. I also have my own podcast, the Prospect Podcast. We're going to dive into everything about all these draft prospects. We're talking about quarterbacks now, but we'll get into some of the other marquee names, big boards, scouting reports, everything like that. And then just at CBS Sports, anything I'm doing is trying to fill the gap over the next few days that is typically for the NFL Combine, a lot of rankings, big boards, and certainly mock drafts over the next few months.
Absolutely. Well, you helped us fill the gap a little bit this week here over on Chargers.com, man. Really appreciate the time. All right, very pleased to be joined by longtime Charger. When you add up his career as a player, as a coach, as a broadcaster, Hank Bauer joins me here on Chargers Weekly. And Hank, like I was telling you off air, I wish this was under better circumstances. 2021 has been particularly rough in the Chargers family. And one of the things about you is you have a connection to all these great men. I want to start with Doug Moosey Wilkerson, a former teammate of yours, 14 years with the Chargers, an all-pro, and by all indications, Hank, an even better person than he was a player.
Yeah, Moosey, he was a scary guy on the field, okay? But off the field, I mean, kind of quiet. The funny thing is his voice didn't match his body. He was one of these elite athletic. He was the first offensive lineman drafted by the Oilers and played 1 year with them before the Chargers traded for him. But he was very athletic. I mean, tiny waist, back then nobody weighed 300, 320, or at least not on weigh-in days. But but he was graceful, athletic, and a supreme athlete. And then he had this high voice kind of talked out of the corner of his mouth, and it didn't match. So I don't know if that's why he was quiet, because his voice never matched his body or the way he looked. He looked so menacing, and played that way. But then he'd say something to you, and you just couldn't help but to laugh. We're playing the Steelers in that great '79 win when the Steelers went on to, win the Super Bowl that year, and we handled them pretty well. And I'll never forget getting in the huddle on the goal line. It was like 4th and 1.5, and Doug had been battling, those guys up front, me, Joe Green, and all those guys up front the whole game long. And I get in and I'm fresh because I'm just coming in for 1 or 2 plays.
Yeah, right.
And the great thing about a huddle is, everybody's personality is different. And for some reason I looked up and Doug was looking at me, and he goes, "Don't you look at me, I'll kill you." He started talking. Whoa, okay. Because he was fully engaged and I had yet to get engaged, you know what I mean? And then I started laughing, because his voice just, "Don't you dare look." And then of course it was expletive. And then Big Russ Washington next to him, his line mate, looks at me and Big Roo look, he goes, "Hey, I wouldn't look at him."
Probably not the best move, Hank.
Yeah, and it was just, moments. It's just, when I think of guys that we've lost, I just think of moments, and all the moments in the locker room and at training camp and off the field and all the charity work, and then the later years and the moment when I saw Doug at the end, and it was pretty tough. It was a pretty sobering. It was a moment that stands out in my life. That last time I saw Doug and his family. So
you said he was just a different person on the field, and you said in your quote we have on the website, Remembering Doug, that him on the field was a completely different person than the guy that you saw in the hallways. Explain what you mean by that.
Most guys are.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you've been around a lot of guys now, right? Gotten to know guys. Most guys are. You gotta turn it on. There are some guys that still have the personality. Like Ed White was an artist, right? Ed White, artist, but he was really quiet on the field. You know what I mean? Ed White was a very business intense. He was the quiet assassin, as it were. Billy Shields, the engineer. That's what I love about our offensive line. It was so diverse. It was so different. Donnie Masick, Billy was the analytic engineer, just, again, quiet on the field, very businesslike. And Donnie Masick, a lot like Big Ed. And then there was Russ Washington, who I talked about, was just huge, athletic, and hey, let's go. Yeah. Hey, all right, this is a party. Hey, let's have fun. And just hey, and then there was Moosey, and it was like, "Don't you look at me." It's just a different level of intensity. That whoa, okay. That's a great thing about the locker room. You get all the different personalities, and that's a trick to coaching. You got to bring them all together and all rowing together. And it's pretty cool.
Those Air Coryell teams, the first thing you think about is that vertical passing game. But you mentioned when you guys needed to run the football, you could run the football against the best of them. And I think that's what gets lost a little bit when you talk about that era.
I think Air Coryell, because we changed the passing game,
Yeah.
People are doing the things now because of the things we brought to the game, and the college game has changed because of the things Air Coryell brought to the game of the NFL. But the label of Air Coryell itself it leads you to believe that all we did was throw 60 times a game, and that wasn't the case. I mean, we had, I think, the best running back that I've ever seen, God-gifted talent that I've ever seen in my life, in Chuck Muncie. He was 6'4.5", 250 plus, ran a sub 4.5, could cut on a dime, and it was a terrific receiver, amazing hands, and inside outside runner. We had great runners, James Brooks. You know, we had great runners, and we ran. And when people wanted to, hey, if you wanted to drop 8, and you wanted to play soft coverage, okay, fine.
Yeah.
Here we go. 80 log, 40 belly. Here we come.
Howie Long, Mean Joe Green. These are guys in that era that Moosey had to go up against on a weekly basis. And I think that's something, too, that gets lost. That era of defensive tackles and pass rushers that someone like Moosey had to go up against during that era.
Yeah, and the thing is, when teams are playing 4 down, right? When you're playing a 4 defensive line front, those were wide ends. So the tackles pretty much were assigned the ends, and then the center might be able to help if there's no blitz to one of the 2 tackles, defensive tackles. So one of your guard was going to be on an island, right? And you never know which one. So it was either going to be Big Ed or Moosey. And I liked our chances with the matchup of either of those guys. But so they're inside, and I get that there's less room to navigate for a defender. But I mean, it's still, get into a phone booth and it's a 15-round heavyweight fight, and there's still enough room to throw punches.
Hank, I got to watch that Epic in Miami roundtable with you guys.
Oh my God.
How fun was that for you guys to reminisce and talk about probably the greatest NFL game ever played?
Marty's gone, right? V-Jack, Wayne Nunley, all these guys just recently. And, I look at our team, we've lost Fred Dean, Big Hands Johnson, the aforementioned Chuck Muncie. In the end, you realize how blessed you are to have been a small part of that amazing bit of history. But in the end, it's not so much the game or the plays, it's the relationships. It's and again, I don't want to be misunderstood by any stretch by the military guys who put their lives on the line for us, right? The guys and gals. But now I can feel a little bit, just a little bit of what they go through, when they sacrifice and they all pull together and they're fighting for a common cause. And then in the end, you leave it out there on the battlefield. And then, you've gone through something special with somebody else that you're not going to do in a normal 9-to-5 job. You're never going to experience that in your lifetime. And so when I think back of those games and those and being able to share with those guys again, it just amplifies that it's the relationships, it's the experiences in life that matter. And gosh, then we get these harsh reminders when we start losing our friends. And then we get to revisit them, and then we laugh, and then we cry, and then we laugh a little more, I hope. So, yeah, it's been a tough month.
I mentioned at the beginning just the different connections you have with the Chargers, and you had a front row seat to those Marty Schottenheimer-led Charger teams with Wayne Nunley on the coaching staff and Vincent Jackson. Let's just start with Marty, probably one of the best leaders in the history of the National Football League. What was it like to be front and center, watching that team prepare on a weekly basis and the success that they had, Hank?
Yeah. Well, first thing is, the hardest thing as a coach is what I talked about earlier. You got all these different personalities, and you got to get them, to play for the common cause, which is to win. And Marty was a lot like Air Coryell in that it wasn't hard for him to do that because he didn't have to work at it. Everybody that's ever been in that locker room or around his teams are a lot like our teams. they so genuinely loved and respected the game and cared about it and cared about his players and their success that players just bought in. They you couldn't help not to, because he was so personally invested and he was so authentic. His love for the game, his respect for the game, his respect for the players and his coaches, that it's infectious. And it wasn't hard for guys to buy in.
Hey, 14-2 that one year, when you lose both of those games by a field goal, just think of just how difficult it is to win in the NFL, to win one game in the NFL, to win right. 14, to lose 2 by a combined 6 points. I think that gets lost into just how special that team is. And listen, you can have an amazing team and not win the Super Bowl. There's a lot of teams like that. You can point to that Patriots team that could have gone 19-0. But
yeah, you can point to our team. Wait a minute, you can point to our teams.
Well, that's right? What I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. You can point to your era. You can point to that 14-2 team. It's like, man, that was one of the special teams in the history of this league.
Yeah, the first thing when you said that, the first thing I thought of is, well, how can you fire him? I mean, how do you fire him after the season? That's the first thing I think of, because it was special. And I think that, the team would, now looking back, would hopefully have learned from it and realized they made a mistake. They probably chose the wrong person at the time, and that was probably not the way to go. And I've heard Dean talk about, yeah, that was probably a mistake. Well, do you think 14 wins is hard to get? And I don't know how and why you would ever make a change after that. But they did, the team did. And you just kind of go on as a player and as a coach and as a fan base and an organization, as a family. So
Wayne Nunley, a beloved coach on that staff. What do you remember about Wayne and just the impact that he had on his players, especially in that position group?
Defensive linemen are different, right? I mean, defensive linemen, they could be a little wild, right? I mean, and they could be a little bit prima donna. They get paid a lot of money to sack quarterbacks. Your position group, the key as a coach is you got to pull them all together, get them all working together. And make them realize it's the team first, right? And so, Wayne was always able to do that and bring out the best in his guys. Wayne was kind of quiet too, you know what I mean? But when you sat down and talked to him, engaging, great personality, really smart, and he's the kind of guy that I would love to have as a next door neighbor that I would never piss off.
You want him on your side.
Absolutely.
Hey, I want to ask you about this 2021 Chargers team, but before we do that, Vincent Jackson.
Goodness.
One of the greatest receivers in the history of the franchise, and we're talking about some pretty good receivers. Vincent's impact in the community, though, and I just got to talk to somebody in Tampa. He was Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee 4 years straight in Tampa. We know what he did in the community too in San Diego. What's your fondest memory of watching Vincent play, but also seeing the man he was?
Well, that's the most important thing, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, what the impact you make on the field is important, and it's always going to be short-lived, for any of us. Vincent got 12 years in. When the average career is less than 3 years, think about that. And when I think about Vincent as a receiver, he was the first in this wave now that we've seen of big wide receivers that could fly, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember? I don't know that I remember a lot that this many guys. Sorry about that. I don't remember this many guys that size, that fast from our era or before, right? But he's 6'5", was 225, 230, and could fly and athletic and made, acrobatic catches. But the important thing is, and that's important, The important thing is, what was his impact? And what will our impact be outside of football? How will you use the confluence of what you achieved to make the world a better place?
Yeah.
And when you think back, how are we going to say Vincent Jackson, a great football player, but, when I think of Vincent Jackson, I think, you know what? The world's a better place because he was here. Military parents, started his Action Jackson Foundation to help military families, gave every bit of himself to it. And when I look back, and we don't know how or why it ended the way it did for Vincent, but we should all know this and recognize this, that our world, all of our worlds were a better place, a way better place, because he was here. And I'm telling you, he had a bigger impact than most players that ever come through the league. And so when I think of Vincent, I don't really think of the, I don't think of the on the field stuff. I think more of the off the field stuff and the impact, because really, as you get older, that's the most important thing. What's your legacy?
Yeah, and that's a testament to the person he was. When you know that he was a great player, and that's kind of in the back of your mind, front facing the person that he was. Hank, yeah. I know that this has probably been a very difficult couple of months for you. I really appreciate you spending some time sharing some memories of these guys, because I think it's important for Chargers fans of all ages. Maybe they weren't quite familiar with your era, or maybe they're newer fans who weren't quite familiar with the Marty Schottenheimer era, to get a little bit of an education into what those teams were like and those players and coaches within those teams. I want to push it forward because I always love seeing you at SoFi Stadium. 2021, Brandon Staley is the new head coach. Your thoughts on this team going into a season where Justin Herbert coming off Offensive Rookie of the Year, some pieces in place. You got to get Derwin James healthy. Got to get him and Joey Bosa on the field at the same time. But a lot of potential as we go into free agency in the draft.
Well, potential means what?
It doesn't mean anything till you win.
You haven't done it yet, okay? But we think you can.
Yep.
And I think that's what this team is. We think they can, but they haven't done it yet. Most important piece to build a football franchise is your quarterback, especially in today's NFL. And boy, I tell you, this kid, Justin Herbert, is the goods. He's the real deal. I was fortunate enough to broadcast with Larry Conn on Sports USA, the national broadcast on radio of his first start. And we didn't learn about it until kickoff. We're looking down and he's warming up and he's getting ready to go on the field. And we're trying to collect the information as we were getting it. We're on a national radio broadcast and we had done the game the week before in Cincinnati, right? And then I watched the kid to be thrown into that situation, not knowing he was going to start. This is the most important thing that I learned about the kid was he prepared, obviously, like he was going to be the starter, because he went out there and he didn't miss a tick. Now, he made a couple bad decisions, late in the game, running to his left. He could have ran for a first down, which probably would have won the game, right? And then that was the play that would have won the game. But he didn't make that mistake again the rest of the year. See, so you could tell he's a smart kid, but more importantly, he prepared like he was going to be the guy, not knowing he was going to be the guy. And then once he was the guy, he was the guy. And I cannot wait to see how far he takes it.
I love what you said, because I think that's been the constant throughout. You see his 15 starts. He never made the same mistake twice. And, right. You can get on a rookie for mistakes, but it's going to happen. Like, it's his first start. To go down.
I always say rule number one for a quarterback, you don't necessarily have to go out and win games. Just don't lose games. Watch football closely. Watch NFL football closely. How often is it that you watch a team and the quarterback makes stupid decisions, tries to do too much, makes them big mistakes, and that because these games are all so even and so equal, and the little things that matter, turnovers, big plays made or not made in the kicking game, and so the rule number one is don't give the game away, and he gets that part. Yeah. And so yeah, I think that's now you got to surround himself with the right pieces. I think more key, the biggest key, he really needs help up front. They got to get him help up front. They got to make some additions to the offensive line. The guys that they had brought in just didn't work out. They got hurt. They were older, took a risk. So I think you got to get the offensive line to match. The skill positions are fine. I'm a huge Austin Eckler fan. I told him when I first saw him as a rookie, I walked up to him. He thought I was crazy. He goes, "Who are you?" And I introduced myself. I said, "I just want to let you know I've watched you on tape. This is his rookie year or second year." I said, "You might be my favorite player to watch. I just love the way you play. You finish runs. You're exciting. You're fun. And I could tell you love the game."
It hurt the Chargers badly when he wasn't on the field during that stretch when he was hurt. To have that extra weapon for Justin, whether it's in the run game or the pass game, having that security blanket outside of the backfield, having him back. But you're right. The combination of having 9 picks in the draft, having some cap space, shore up the offensive line, maybe get some players that Staley likes defensively, that fit what he wants to do, to round out what they already have. Guys like Kenneth Murray, Drew Tranquil coming back. I think that's going to help on special teams. Like you said, potential doesn't really mean much. But
you haven't done it yet.
You haven't done it yet. But you know what, Hank? At least it's exciting to see over these next couple of months how this team is going to take shape. The foundation is laid. And I think the hardest part, you can breathe a sigh of relief. You got your quarterback. A lot of teams don't have their quarterback, and they're scrambling in April, either trying to roll the dice on a guy in the first round or seeing what's there in the free agency market. The Chargers, to go from Drew Brees to Phillip Rivers to Justin Herbert so seamlessly, doesn't usually happen that way.
No, you don't look around. All you got to do is look around the league and watch the carousel of quarterbacks with some franchises, and you'd be thankful that if you're a Charger fan, that you've got this guy for hopefully the long time, for the long term, and you hope he stays healthy, but you got to help him stay healthy, right?
Yep. Hank Bauer, I appreciate your time. I really do. I thought this was great to have some memories of some of these guys that you knew so well, and also to look forward to the 2021 season. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Chris, I appreciate it. And look, it's been a rough month, but I'm gonna choose to celebrate today. I'm gonna think of Marty, and I'm gonna think about the Gleam, and I'm gonna think about Wayne, and I'm gonna think about Wayne on he and I talking on the charter flights home after a tough loss, and and stuff like. I'm gonna think about VJack doing out there with all the military kids, so I'm going to try to focus on more of the positive, and I'm going to celebrate their lives.